All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to us here, the Warriors Journey podcast. I'm Kevin Weaver with the Warriors Journey, and we're glad that you decided to tune in today. We're back in our digital studios. It's been a while since we've had our one-on-one studios, but COVID is almost over, I hope. And today we have with us a very, very special guest, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Wolf with Soul Survivor Outdoors, or Outdoor, excuse me, Soul Survivor Outdoor. And Rick, welcome.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me on here, Kevin. Really appreciate the time this morning.
Well, hey, it's great to have you, and it's great to have an opportunity to learn more about not only you personally, because I'm always intrigued by guys like you who say, "Man, I want to be a Marine." I have some family who, I've got a nephew in particular who's still currently serving as a Marine, and just in fact, he was so inspirational to my boys. And now I've got two boys who are active duty. They're in the Army, but they're both
Okay.
combat arms, and kind of pushed to the ones in special operations. And so, but they look at
Wow.
their older cousin like, man, he's our hero. And I think they almost thought the Marine Corps might be too hard, so
Oh,
it's a, it's a, it's, there's a special place for you guys, and just so appreciative of what you
yeah.
have done, what you continue to do, and then how that carries over into now this amazing organization called Soul Survivor Outdoor. So tell us a little bit about who you are, and tell us about your family, your military career, and we'll talk then about how that carried over into your organization.
You bet. So, grew up in Colorado, which is a great place to grow up. And I guess that's probably some of the foundation of being outdoors. That was pretty important to my parents, my dad. So we did a lot of backpacking and so forth in Colorado growing up.
Hmm.
Um, as my parents had grown up during World War II, and my dad was Korean War era, but served in post World War II Germany. So came back from that. Didn't serve a long time, just did his tour after being drafted.
Hmm.
But my parents were very patriotic and still are. They're in their late 80s right now.
Oh,
But
wow.
at the time, growing up in that family, really felt like we kind of owed something to our country in terms of service, and that freedoms weren't free, and
Hmm.
that was a high value. I don't think my dad ever said, "Hey, you ought to join the military." It was just, kind of maybe an undertone in the sense that we value our country, and serving it is an honorable thing to do, and serving in the military certainly is. And so it was there, but it wasn't talked about a whole lot. We used to go to Air Force Academy football games and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to
That's
say it
cool.
out loud, but at one point I actually applied to the Air Force Academy. Don't tell my Marine friends that.
Hey, listen,
Um,
I'm an Air Force vet. I love it. That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I actually got a nomination from the congressman at that time, but did not get the appointment,
Hmm.
and then kind of, forgot about that. But yeah, grew up doing outdoor stuff, lived outside of Denver, went to Colorado State University where I met my wife about 36 years ago. We've been married 34 years now.
Oh,
We have
congrats.
3 boys. We have, Tim's 25 almost, Philip's 23 and married, lives up in the Napa, California area, and
Hmm.
running a project right now that's about a $15 million house.
Wow.
His wife is an RN. And then we have a younger son who is Nathan. He's almost 15. And anyway, we've lived here in California a long time.
Hmm.
I after graduating from college, I worked in the construction industry for a little bit while my wife was finishing her degree. So we got married while she was still in college, and near the end of her education, I went to the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, and got a commission. And then that was 1989 when I did that. So quite a
Was
few
that
years
back?
ago.
Was that back out in Quantico? Was that still
Yeah,
okay? Great.
Quantico.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. So you
And so that training was there, and going into a little bit, why the Marine Corps.
and it
you
was active
know
duty, right? It
oh
wasn't a
yeah.
reserve thing. It was active
Yeah.
duty. Okay. So
Yeah,
you're in now. You're committed for at least 4 years, and
that's right.
okay.
Yeah. So I remember at the time, a little bit before that, my dad saying, hey, why the Marines, like, Um, and he had served in the Army. So I don't know, maybe he had some experience there that I didn't. But, and of course, they had grown up during World War II, and they'd seen the stuff that the military was doing, and that first to fight idea. There was a
Hmm.
lot of that, not to malign or downplay any of the other services, certainly.
Hmm.
But I think my dad thought, he may have even said, "Why go be cannon fodder?" I was like, "What?" So that's not a very complimentary term about a military branch.
Wow.
I said, "Hey, Dad, I think it's just that it seems hard,
Hmm.
and I feel like if I'm going to do something, or if I'm going to join the military, uh, it ought to be as hard as it can be. Like, go do that."
Hmm.
And so that kind of factored into it a little bit, and just thought, I want to be challenged. I don't want to, and wherever I got that perception, and obviously people are challenged to pursue careers in all the branches of the military and law enforcement and other first responders, but it just was in my mind, go do something in the military and then pick the hardest thing that there is to do, and that was my impression.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's what landed me there. I also had a couple of friends that had gone through officer candidate school, so kind of got a secondhand information on that, and ultimately did that. Served for about 4.5 years of active duty. During that time period, spent a little bit, a very short period of time in Somalia, and
Hmm.
another deployment, and a lot of training, and then came back. Went to the civilian sector for a while. Went back on active duty for a couple more years. Went back to the reserves.
Wow.
Got mobilized after 9/11. Had to go to this really horrible, awful place. You might have heard of it. It's called Hawaii.
That's awesome.
So
Now, when you
yes,
going backwards a little bit, when you were in Somalia, was this during the 93
yeah,
kind of all that? So you were all part of that then?
yeah. So, and it was quite interesting. Multinational, obviously
Hmm.
UN.
Hmm.
Colin Powell made a visit there.
Hmm.
General, let's see. Well, I guess I don't know if Mattis was there or not at the time.
Hmm.
General Johnston was the MEF commander.
I think General Boykin was a part of that too. I'm pretty sure, wasn't he?
He absolutely was. Of
Yeah.
course, I was a lieutenant at the time, so I didn't see that, but
Hmm.
but I did was functioning as an officer at a headquarters level with a division commander, and so
Hmm.
saw a lot there. Got to fly in a lot of helicopters.
Hmm.
I had a boss who said, "Hey, sitting behind the desk isn't what lieutenants like to do. There's a helicopter leaving off the pad right now. If you want to go, grab your stuff and go." And can't tell you how many times I did that. So
Hmm. Hmm.
I often say to my wife, I think the things I had the most fun doing in the military were also the things that possibly presented the most risk to my life
Right,
too.
right.
But you're just kind of dumb and just like, oh, let's go, fly in a helicopter. Uh,
That's a Marine ethos though, isn't it? I mean, come
yeah,
on, let's go. Let's run to the sound of gunfire, right?
yeah.
When you
So
were in Somalia, I know we have a lot of listeners. In fact, I've had some people even on the podcast who were part of that whole, Black Hawk Down
yeah,
incident. Were you actually there on that particular incident when that happened in that? Because I know
I
we were
was
there for a
not.
long time, but yeah, so but there's a lot of stuff that
Yeah,
happened that a lot of people don't know about, in
right.
between all around that. Exactly. So
Well, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of starvation when I got there. There were a lot of,
mm,
shallow grave things
mm-hmm,
there. I
mm-hmm,
spent, I think, March and April of '93 there, so only a couple of months.
mm-hmm,
And got to get all over Mogadishu. Back then, we weren't driving around in, up armored vehicles and so forth. We're driving around in 5 tons and
mm-hmm.
soft shell vehicles. And as a lieutenant and a communications officer, so an IT guy, you could be told by the colonel, "Hey, grab an M16, jump in the back of the general's vehicle, and basically be the QRF, so to speak, because
Mm-hmm.
here's the general sitting right in front of you." And no one would ever do that at this point in time, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
It would be much more deliberate than that. There would be armored vehicles, there would be all that kind of stuff. It was also a different posture for the country. I think
Mm-hmm.
people and or countries, and rightfully so, they had a very distinct respect for us. They were kind of afraid of what we might do. If a Somali would pop up with a small arms, probably a Cobra would fly over and leave a hole in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not a strategist,
Hmm.
but it seemed to be pretty effective because it stopped in the tracks any desire on the part of that particular potential enemy to want to do anything. Like,
Yeah.
well, if we shoot at them with a 9 mil, they're going to hit us with a big missile.
Yeah. Peace
Probably
through
not a
strength,
great
right?
combination. Yeah, not a
Yeah.
great. It's not a winning proposition. Let's not do that. And
Hmm.
so, at
Hmm.
least while I was there, I mean, there was some exchange of small arms fire. Um, I wasn't involved in any of that. I was
Hmm.
at what had been previously the embassy compound,
Hmm.
pretty large place. I did get out in town a lot of times. I flew all over the country with the general because of just the opportunity afforded to me. I've got hundreds of pictures of that. Of course, they're none of them digital. They're all, hard copy. Um,
back in
and
back in the day.
yeah, so that was a super interesting experience.
I bet.
I was at Fifth Marines back then, and they said one of my bosses said, Rick, you can either go back to the desert of 29 Palms with us for a major exercise for a couple months, or you can go to Somalia. And I thought, I ain't been to Somalia. That
Why
sounds like a
not?
much better opportunity. So that's how I ended up there. And my wife probably tells the story somewhat differently, but like, hey, you idiot, what are you doing? Couldn't you just go to 29 Palms? um,
Because you guys, now, were you married yet at this point?
oh yeah, yeah, we,
Okay.
we we were married from before the time I wasn't a Marine when we were married.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
um,
okay, yeah, okay. Well, it's because that but you would have been very newly married. It would have been only
yeah,
been a year or two,
yeah,
right? Or yeah, okay.
yeah. By then, that was 93, so he'd been married since 5 years.
Okay, 5 years. Yeah.
So
Well, still,
yeah,
that's still pretty new. That's
yep,
her getting used to that whole process, and I know that's a big transition, big adjustment. So
yeah.
fast forward past 9/11, you're activated. You tell us about your experience. In that period before you ended up retiring, because you retired, I'm sure, at some
Yeah,
point. Yep. So
yeah.
so
So
what does
without
that look
giving
like?
all the details relative to, no one wants to hear every duty station or any of that. I, started with a bunch of different units.
Hmm.
I was mobilized after 9/11 for about 9 months. Finished that mobilization, came back home, went back to my civilian pursuit, which was again in the construction industry.
Hmm.
So did that for a number of years. Stayed very active in the reserves.
Hmm.
Went to Korea and Germany and other places, as, short-term reserve stuff. Um, and then at the end of 2011, somebody said, hey, be great if you would come over to the first Marine Expeditionary Force and be what they called the information management officer. So I mobilized to do that.
Hmm.
It was, again, a local tour. I live in Carlsbad. Camp Pendleton is about 15 minutes from me.
Hmm.
There had been another job in Okinawa that I was looking at. I took the job that was here locally and mobilized for 18 months with the Marine Expeditionary Force at Camp Pendleton, doing IT related stuff. That was a super interesting experience, and in my late 40s at that point, still a formative experience, I would say, relative to leadership and so forth. I did not have a single Marine working for me at that time. I was the sole Marine with about 20 contractors that were
Hmm.
doing various IT related kinds of things. So,
No
um,
pressure.
yeah, so it's really actually a super great
I
experience.
bet.
At the end of that, somebody said, "Hey, they're looking for a uh, officer in charge to go to Hawaii or 29 Palms to be in charge of Wounded Warrior Battalion Detachment." And so I said, "Okay, well, let's see what that's all about." I went and met some folks at Wounded Warrior Battalion West, which is at Camp Pendleton.
Hmm.
Met the battalion commander. Had an interview. They're looking for reservists that they felt would fit the bill to be able to do that. I mentioned I have three sons. One of them has a physical disability. He has a spinal defect. And, that came up during the conversation. Tell me about your family and what's going on. And I mentioned that.
Hmm.
That kind of piqued their interest because said, okay, you got some people with some injuries, and you've got some, physical, mental, spiritual things going on. And we'll get back to you. So before I finished my previous tour of duty, then I had another set of orders to be the OIC for the Wounded Warrior Detachment at 29 Palms.
That's great.
Um, so all in all, out of the 28, 29 years that I served in the reserves, a little less than half of that was on active duty.
Hmm.
and the Wounded Warrior Detachment. That's you mentioned that you before the podcast you mentioned some of your degree background and counseling and
Hmm.
so forth. Well, I should have had a degree in in psychiatry, psychology, marriage and family, something I think to be really fully prepared to do that job, because it's a complex environment. You have people with physical wounds. You had a lot of soul wounds or PTS, and some say
Hmm.
PTSD. But a lot of that was going on. So, um, super interesting experience, and did that for about 13 months or so.
And was that
I,
all at 29 Palms, or did you do some of that when you were in Hawaii too, or that was a different experience?
yeah, so Hawaii was previous to that,
Gotcha.
and so this was just kind of a progression of career, moving in the direction of ultimately retiring within a few years, and so between the MEF and the Wounded Warrior Detachment, served
Hmm.
another about 3 years on mobilized orders. So I had three mobilizations, one after 9/11, and then two back to back, from end of 2011 through 2014.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for all you did. I know that a lot of people who are listening, we've had a lot of interviews, and I love the fact that you've got people who are doing different type of complex jobs that all sync together to make this thing happen. And it's not just the guys who are out, you know, the guys that you see in the movies.
Right.
It takes
Yeah.
a big machine. And so that's pretty awesome. And I got to believe that somehow, some way that I'm guessing, because we haven't even talked about this. I'm just
Yeah.
taking a wild guess here, but that your involvement with the Wounded Warrior Battalion, how did that play into what would then become Soul Survivor Outdoor? Was there any type of impotence or inspiration that came from that?
Yeah. Well, so working in that environment and seeing the kind of stuff that was going on, it was I would say it was evident really fast that yes, there were physical things going on. Yes, there were mental things going on. Yes, I had Marines who had attempted to take their lives, and as a result, they were part of that detachment.
Mm,
And there were a few that were not related to combat, but the majority of the Marines that I had were combat vets,
mhm.
and the even had a guy that was a Bronze Star recipient that's, I believe, subsequently been upgraded to a Silver Star. So while he had deployed to Afghanistan on two separate occasions, on one occasion he'd been shot through the shoulder with an AK-47. On
Mm,
another occasion, he had been shot through the hip with an AK-47. And as a result, he was with us because the physical issues that he had, torn labrums and things like that, were significant enough that he could probably go and serve in law enforcement or something like that. But some of the stuff the Marines were going to require
mhm,
would have made it super difficult and not terribly likely that he would get back to what would be 100%
mhm.
or close enough to 100% to continue to serve. So
So
I had a
not
lot of those.
was it not enough to med board him per se, but he wouldn't have the same
He was
job.
well, he
Or
was being med boarded
was he?
basically.
Okay.
He ultimately received retirement through, disability and that whole, they call it integrated disability, IDES, whatever that acronym
Hmm.
stands for. I've forgotten.
And he earned
Um,
it. He earned it.
oh, he absolutely earned it.
Yeah.
And so, but that's just one of the stories. And then, different conversations with some of these Marines, saying to one of them in the morning, who's, because one part of their job of being in this detachment was, well, I got to take care of myself medically. That's a super focus. I've got a lot of medical appointments, would make it very difficult for me to serve in a regular unit,
Hmm.
because I'm going to the doctor so often to take care of different stuff, and then writing resumes and doing other things, and basically in preparation for transition. So,
Hmm.
you're kind of shepherding this flock, so to speak, so that most of them are going to transition out of the military.
Mm.
Well, one of them was in our library, our study, staring at a computer. I just walked back from some appointment, came in, hey, Staff Sergeant, how you doing today? Oh, I'm doing great, sir. And then you go, I don't know if I believe that or not. And this is not terribly appropriate in general Marine Corps terms to do this, but I just said, hey, Tony. So you don't call people by first names.
Right.
I said, hey, Tony. And as I pulled up a chair, I go, what's really going on? And then he proceeded to share some stuff about Fallujah and a
Mm,
Marine that had died, as a result of a decision he made,
mm,
and and some other stuff like that. And so
mm,
just these kinds of experiences of having these different conversations with these Marines and seeing that there's a lot more going on. There's a lot of mental stuff going on.
mhm.
There's probably some spiritual things going on. That was, really kind of got my attention, so to speak.
That's great. So when you begin to develop this, tell us what is Soul Survivor Outdoor? What's the end game? When someone
Yeah,
comes in, what do you hope the guys walk away with? They come in. I know it's not just Marines, right? It's
right.
it's it's all branches, right? Just
Yep.
any. Okay, so yeah. So
Yeah.
what's the hope?
Yeah. So, well, let's talk a little bit real quick about, how we got from, point A to point B. So sitting there in that detachment at one point, I thought, there's a lot of monetary resources being thrown at this. There's a lot of, uh, you know, everything from iPads to vans to trips to Disneyland, all kinds of stuff that people are doing, and a lot of it's helpful, and some of it might not be.
Hmm.
And I know Chad Robichaux has spoken about how many programs have been developed in the arena of PTSD and caring for anxiety and suicidal ideation and all that. In that context, I thought, okay, having been a Christian my whole Marine Corps career and been through some trials myself and having some really nitty gritty, honest conversations with God, going, okay, there's a root cause, or there's a bigger issue that's involved, and what's our foundation for living? Can we have that conversation? Can you talk about faith? How would you do that? I'm not the chaplain,
Hmm.
so how is there a way to do that creatively without getting fired? And so I thought, let's have a quote wilderness therapy kind of event. Let's do some research on that. What does that look like? We've got some things around here that we could do. We had a great chaplain that supported us, a couple of great chaplains that supported us at the time. And so I spoke to them about it, had a Marine Master Sergeant who was very interested in this, some other people that thought about it. I mentioned it to the regimental commander. Hey, can we take guys out to Joshua Tree and kind of have a non-alcoholic tailgater, maybe throw some cornhole, burn some burgers on the grill, just be outdoors and kind of fellowship, and maybe have somebody have a fireside chat. He said, hey, sounds great to me. Go for it. So did a little bit of research, put it all together, told the battalion commander, hey, here's what we wanted to do. Wasn't sure how that would be received. He said, oh, great, that'd be great. Why don't you go do that?
Because this is why you're still in the Marine
This is
Corps. Yeah,
still in
yeah.
uniform.
Gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
so that first evolution, kind of informally, we went,
Hmm.
because it was, because I was in charge, I could say, hey, we're all going to do this. We're going to spend less than 24 hours in the field. Nothing, not like typical Marine Corps field. Just, hey, if you want to bring a blow up mattress, go for it. We're going to go and, spend some time at Joshua Tree from about 2 in the afternoon one day until about 2 in the afternoon the next. We'll have some burgers. We'll do some stuff. Uh, that first night, that master sergeant kind of shared his story. He said, hey, I have pretty severe PTSD. I'm not part of your detachment. I'm serving in this other role. I've been to combat multiple times. And, I've tried what Navy medicine would offer. I've tried a lot of the different things. And, and my story is, my faith in Christ is how I got out of the hole.
Mm.
And so we had two more of those while I was on active duty that kind of looked like that. By the time we did the third one, we brought in some rock climbing. So we had,
That's
the
great.
meal the previous night. The regimental commander actually came out. He said, hey, Rick, can I bring cigars? I said, sure, do it. I don't smoke cigars, but go for it.
Sure.
So he came out. I think the battalion chaplain came out, the climbing guides who used to this day. So from 2014, fast forward to 2021, we still use the same guide service in Joshua Tree National Park area.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and so, that's kind of where it started. And the regimental commander then said at the conclusion of, hey, we had a meal, we had some camaraderie, we had a physical activity, we had a discussion. I think that day we had an Army Ranger come out, tell a story about Afghanistan, got really broken up through a parachute accident, on a
Mm.
on an op, not a training exercise, but in
Mhm.
Afghanistan, parachuting into somewhere and having a not completely catastrophic failure, because he wouldn't have been around to tell about it,
Right.
but got broken very badly.
Mm.
Told his story, how his faith was part of his coming back to, as close to 100% as he could get.
Mhm.
And the regimental commander said, "Man," and I don't believe he was a Christian. He just said, "This is one of the best physical, spiritual things that I've been to in 2 years in our
Mm.
regiment." And I thought, wow, huh. Well, I thought, number one, that's cool.
Yeah.
Number two, I thought, this isn't rocket science. It's just getting folks out in the dirt, sharing a meal and an activity. Maybe we're onto something here.
Yeah.
And
Practical,
so,
practical, practical, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So as I came off of active duty in 2014, after I left active duty to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest or any of that, after I was completely done with that tour, then we formed the nonprofit, became a corporation in the state of California, did all that, having no idea how this was all going to work.
Mm.
And then, as you mentioned, what's the end game? The things that we do, unlike, week-long programs like, or much more a multi-week programs like
Mhm.
Reboot or
Mhm.
Mighty Oaks or other things,
Mhm.
really, we're just the spark.
Mhm.
We might have a day or a half day. We do very little in the way of overnight stuff. We're going to have one opportunity to say to a service member. And, we've been doing this in California with Marine Corps, mostly a little bit of Navy.
Mhm.
Last year, we started doing work at and around Fort Hood with the soldiers there.
This is
But,
fantastic. So
but,
needed.
but if we're going to be somewhere, what we're going to do is we're going to have this activity. And during that, if it's a half day or a full day evolution, we might get a half of an hour, 30 minutes out of this 6, 8 hour time period where
Mhm.
maybe they're doing rock climbing, or maybe it's skydiving, or in Texas, we've been mostly doing horseback riding,
Mhm.
and a lot of things that really it's the activity, it's a meal, and it's a discussion. And that discussion is to say, hey, have you thought about who you are
Mhm.
um, in a bigger context? What's your identity?
Mhm.
Because I don't care if you're a football player, police officer, a mom, a dad, a college student, a Marine, a soldier, an airman, a coastie,
Mhm.
who did I miss so I don't malign anybody?
Yeah.
Um,
Space Force.
yeah, okay. You know, um, where's your ultimate identity? And
Mhm.
if you put it in the grand scheme of things, the world will at least acknowledge that there are two main lines of thought on that. Either one, some intelligent force somewhere, a god
Mhm.
or gods, or a alien life form or something, some
Mhm.
intelligent being put human beings on the earth. Okay.
Mhm.
Or we're evolved. We're basically, a cosmic accident,
Mhm.
essentially,
Mhm.
through happenstance, ultimately through billions of years or trillions of years, we've come to
Yeah.
what we are. I go,
Some
that
some cell in some primordial pool that just
that's
happened
right.
to grow. Yeah. Which
Yeah. So with those two thinking, and I probably, I'm making it longer than what one of my discussions would be if I was having this discussion in front of a service member. I'd say, okay, so there's either a God that created you, or you're a cosmic accident.
Mhm.
Okay, so now given those two choices, let me tell you what the Bible has to say about that. Well, the
Mhm.
Bible says that in the beginning, God, and he created each one of us in his image. And then, Jesus would use the phrase, you've heard that it was said. I'm going to use the same one. You've heard that it was said God's angry and mean in the Old Testament and blah, 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 right? So I said, well, on the other hand, here, let me just really rapid fire give you a couple of scriptural examples. Before you existed, God knew who you were. Okay. He had a
Mhm.
plan and purpose for you.
Mhm.
His plans are to prosper you and give you a hope.
Mhm.
Zephaniah said, the one translation says, the mighty warrior king dances and sings over you.
Mhm.
Fast forward to the New Testament. It says, God himself put himself in your place. So just pause for a moment in this outdoor environment of having some fun and everything, and maybe unplug a little bit from your cell phone or whatever else is going on, and say, huh, okay, so uh, I've probably been taught my whole life that my identity is in whatever my career is, or in what people tell me it is, or my physicality. I'm a
Yep.
great athlete or whatever.
Or what I've earned and what's sitting on my uniform right here
That's
that I get
right.
to display to everybody. Yeah.
That's right. Very few people are going to say, actually, your identity is much more um, basic than that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Tony Dungy, who's a football guy and played and coached, and I'm a fan of his. I'm not a Colts fan, but
Well, he
but
was at Tampa Bay too, so
that's true. Yeah, that's true. So, but he says, hey, you know what? I did football and I still do football, but my identity is not football. My
Yeah.
identity is Jesus Christ. You go, okay, you know what? My identity is not Marine or
Hmm.
sailor, soldier, airman, Coast Guardsman, police officer, mom, dad, athlete, good looking, not good looking, super intelligent, not. My identity rests in who God says that I am.
Hmm.
That's not something that people are hearing these days.
No, that's true.
What they're hearing, as much as it's become a very not politically correct thing to say, the reality is what our education system and what the world is telling people is, guess what? Nobody matters.
Yeah,
Um, as opposed to God of the Bible says, time out, everybody matters.
that's right.
It doesn't matter for any reason except that I made you
Hmm.
and I say you matter. Now, when you tell people that, as crazy as it seems, and for those who, you probably get all kinds of different listeners, some are just
Hmm.
curious, what the heck is this podcast? And others who are Christians who would say, well, I'll tell you what, you go to an event and you have 3 different days, back to back to back of rock climbing. And you have 20 service members Wednesday and 20 Thursday and 10 or 9 or 10 Friday. And then you give this message and you give an opportunity to receive Christ. And
Hmm.
49 out
Hmm.
of 50 pray to receive Christ. You go, what?
That's
I
crazy.
wouldn't believe it if I wasn't witnessing it myself.
Right.
And so it's just this spark of saying, hey, start your path of discovery, that maybe there's more to life than what you've been told up to this point. Maybe there really is a God, and you don't have to believe it, but at least consider it. The Bible
Yeah.
says, come let us reason together, right?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
God saying, it's an intellectual pursuit as much as it is a faith pursuit.
Yeah. Or
Um,
relationship pursuit,
that's right.
with our creator. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that is much longer actually than some of these discussions, to say, okay, hey, let's go jump out of a plane, let's have a sandwich, let's have a guest speaker, and then let's tell you that you actually have meaning and purpose because God says that you do. And then I think that
Yeah.
really piques people's interest,
That's
and
fantastic.
they're super hungry. Of course, it's not always nearly 100% saying, gee, I want some of that.
Right.
um,
Right.
but it has consistently been 30 or more percent, which is kind of mind boggling.
Well, Rick, I got to believe that, you talk about that spark there. I'm sure that there are guys that hear that maybe like, you know what, I'll think about that. But who knows what happens after that? Or maybe that, hey, later on down the road, because of that experience,
Yeah,
that was a huge catalyst for them coming to a place of faith, or
yeah,
an acknowledgement that, what, I think I'm going to live my life according to some principles that are going to be a little bit more constructive than what the world is talking about.
good.
That's really awesome. So
Yeah, for
that's a
us.
great end game.
Yeah, for us, when all heads are bowed, and then somebody says, hey, if you prayed that prayer, look up at us, and
Hmm.
30% or maybe the whole group looks at you and you go, wow. Well, that brings obviously incredible amount of going, wow, okay, I think we're doing the right thing. Then
Absolutely.
we don't hear as much of this because, as I think up to this point, we may have touched the lives of 5 or 6,000 active duty service members, and you don't hear a lot back. I mean, you get some feedback. We get the Google reviews,
Mm-hmm.
which are good, but only a fraction of that total number.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant who texts me and he says, hey, Rick, you were the one who organized that thing. I was thinking it was for the junior Marines, but you invited me. And you said, no, Gunny, or he was a staff sergeant at that time, staff
Mm-hmm.
sergeant, please come. And then he says, that was 2 years ago. I was in a really dark place. You did not know that.
Mm.
And he closed his text with, and you saved my life that day, and you didn't
Wow.
know it.
Wow.
Um, I think that's indicative of what's happening. What you
Yeah.
just said, that there's probably a lot of people who don't say anything, but they walk away and they go, what about that?
Yep. Yep.
A
You
couple
can't.
weeks ago,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, a couple weeks ago, we had, it was actually, I believe it was Tim Solomon, who were talking about this event planning in the near future. He said, hey, Rick, I had a guy come to me and say, a few weeks later, hey, how do I come to know Christ?
Mm-hmm.
And he said that's a direct result, I think, of that event that you held. Had
Wow.
another gentleman on the same weekend say, had a ring go out to some other event. You guys were zip lining. He said, then when he heard it was a Christian organization, he thought, oh, it's going to be a kiddie zip line. It's going to be like 50 feet or something. And there's going to be a vacation Bible school kind of message. And I don't want to go. And then the chaplain said, well, for whatever reason, he decided to go anyway. And then he found out that, hey, it was a 4-hour evolution, and there was one zip line that was, I don't know, a couple thousand feet long. You got up to about 55 miles an hour. And it was self-arrest. You had to brake yourself. No one was stopping you except you and your leather glove. Um, and there's some safety constraints, obviously. We manage the risk to a certain degree, but
Sure.
the point is, so it was this really exhilarating thing, and then we had a discussion afterwards, and then one of the chaplains who attended kind of reinforced what we had said, and then he went back to the chaplain a few weeks later and said, or maybe the religious programmer, and said,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even going to church, I'm not religious, but guess what, I'm back in church.
Wow.
And so these things, I think, are happening all the time. And so it's
Yeah.
just like, if we can light a fire to
Mm-hmm.
say, there's a lot more to life than your education, your career,
Yep.
where you came from, your gender, all these things. They're important issues, but like, is there a foundational issue that we can talk about and
Yeah.
get
What's
centered?
essential? Yeah. What's
Right.
essential? Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So Rick, what are ways that our listeners, if they're here and they're like, man, I don't want to know more about this. I'd like to maybe get involved, or maybe there's someone listening saying, hey, is there a possibility I could help or assist? I'd like to be a part.
Yeah.
I really would align with this. What would you like to tell them, and how can we make that connection?
So we're always looking for, new volunteers in areas. I've been praying specifically about Colorado Springs
Mm-hmm.
because there's a huge demand there right now, and we're going to try to run an event or two in the next few weeks. But we don't have a point person there, basically, I mean, we could potentially run into somebody through a podcast or who knows what, who could ultimately end up being a leader,
Mm-hmm.
because that's how some of these connections happen. So that's important. Resources, and when I say resources for us, so that can be a climbing guide service
Mm-hmm.
that has a heart for this, who might provide a discount. It can be a person in Dana Point who has 100-foot boat that wants to take people deep sea fishing and is willing to do it at no cost.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Financially, um, that's huge,
Mm-hmm.
because the majority of our expenses are going towards these activities,
Yeah.
because and people have said, hey, Rick, shouldn't these service members be paying a part to participate in this stuff? And it's been our core value to say no. They're a recipient,
Mm-hmm.
so when they go rock climbing, skydiving, zip lining, sailing, fly fishing, skeet shooting, long list of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
we pay for all of that. And it's not unusual, if we take 40 people skydiving, that's a $10,000 day.
Yeah.
And somebody says, holy moly, $10,000 just for this small chance to speak to these service members about Jesus. I go, hey, what did Jesus' life cost?
Well,
Um,
too, and what does that activity, how does that open the door? I mean, how else? I can guarantee that there are probably a bunch of guys, and I'm sure they would say this, that would say, if it wasn't for that activity, you got my attention, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
and and you've helped me to focus, and that kind of made me, in a sense, feel like, okay, I'm ready to listen,
Yeah.
versus just, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? There's a big difference.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
get
Well,
that.
and going back to that Wounded Warrior Detachment thing, it's like, hey, most of the chapels on bases and stuff are not full of
No,
military service members,
that's right.
and local churches out in town off the bases are not full of service members.
Yeah, they're
Frankly,
not meeting those needs. That's right.
well, and frankly, they're not full of, millennials, Gen Xers, Zs, they're not full of the, so it's like, okay, how do you get their attention? Because there's an awful lot of noise out there. So is there a way to, get their attention to what's happening and be able to have that discussion? So,
Absolutely.
so
Love it.
anyway, so
Love it.
financially super important. Christian Broadcast Network donates
Hmm.
significantly to what we do. Mighty
Hmm.
Oaks does.
Hmm.
Harbaugh Foundation, no affiliation with the football team.
Right, right.
TSUA, which is in Hawaii, they're
Fantastic.
big grant makers. And then there's a few hundred people that are monthly partners with us. We have monthly partners that are $10 a month.
Yeah.
That goes a long ways when you add that up.
So
And
if I want to do that, Rick, what's the best way through the website? How do we
yeah,
contact you and get in there and,
yeah.
and participate?
So if you go to the website, everything is available there, and there's a donate tab there. So that's just www.soulsurvivoroutdoor.org, and soul is spelled SOUL,
Hmm.
and everything is singular. So soulsurvivoroutdoor.org, and you can click on the donate, and you can become a monthly partner. That's huge. More than people think.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, we have people giving $10 a month, and we have people giving $1,000 a month, and it adds up, and it's having a tremendous
Makes a difference.
impact.
Yeah, it makes a
And
difference.
just relevancy of military ministry, and this, it's a true melting pot. I grew up a certain way, and I grew up in a certain environment and so forth, and I'm a certain skin color and all that kind of stuff, and had a certain religious background and all of that. You know what? But people come from every single walk of life. Last week, when we were skydiving with the soldiers from the recruiting office,
Hmm.
there was a gentleman from Gambia, West Africa. There was a gentleman from Guatemala. Um, and I'm forgetting the other. There were three soldiers who were staff sergeants that were from countries other than the U.S.
Hmm.
So it's every tribe, tongue, and nation is part of the military, and the core value of treating one another as you want to be treated. It's a biblical value, but it's not necessarily attributed to the Bible.
Hmm.
And there are severe consequences for not treating people accordingly. And so,
So true.
and not only that, but military service members are, you know, um, like law enforcement. They're raising their right hand and they're saying, "Hey, send me."
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I'm
and
willing to give a cost up to include my life.
that's right.
It's, yeah. So it's huge.
So I would say that military ministry, whether it's what you're doing or these other organizations we've already talked about, I'd say to your listeners, hey, we would love your support. But you know what? The Warrior's Journey, support them. Military ministry is both. I think it's a component of strategic global evangelism.
Yeah.
And by that I mean both here locally in the United States, because people are coming from every walk of life and every country around the world. And
Hmm.
as we deploy, we're taking the light and life of Jesus Christ every place that we go. And there are
Hmm.
real life stories of Iraqis who are Christians because the soldier who walked the beat in Baghdad with an Iraqi translator, that translator is a Christian because that 82nd Airborne soldier had the guts to share. Well, actually, the Iraqi said, "Hey, what's that thing in your pocket you carry around all the time?" "Oh, that's my Bible." "Well, tell me more about that." And so,
And maybe equally important, hey, how come you care about me?
Right.
they're actually demonstrating the love of Christ too. It's not just, something they're
Right.
talking about. They're actually demonstrating it. And
That's right.
and I've
So
seen that. I've seen it happen more than once. You're exactly right. There are Kurds, there are Iraqis, there are Afghans who are loving Jesus right now because of some faithful people.
that's right.
That's pretty
So,
cool.
so I'd say to people, one of the best investments you can make with your dollars as a Christian is to invest in some sort of military ministry,
Hmm.
because those people are wanting to serve, willing to lay their life down, and when they come to know Jesus, that's a very dynamic combination.
That's
And so I
fantastic.
think, invest in Soul Survivor Outdoor, absolutely.
Well, you
Volunteer.
Well, you're the focus, brother. So that's what I want to focus on today. So if you're listening and
Well,
you feel inspired, hey, we would encourage you to do that. We're in this together. Of course,
you bet.
to those of you who are listening, hey, we just enjoy. In fact, we're getting ready to do a little partnership out at 29 Palms here in just
Yeah,
in a few weeks, and excited about that. I hope that people understand as they're hearing this that there isn't a competition, in this deal.
no,
We're locking arms together, and this is a team effort. It's kind of like the military. It doesn't matter if you're a Marine, an Air Force guy, an Army guy. When it's all said and done, when there may be jesting, but the bottom line is we're all on the same team, and we're
that's
trying to get
right.
the same mission accomplished. So, Rick,
Absolutely.
I'm glad there are people like you that have the vision that you had, and you were faithful to execute it, and continue to look forward to seeing great success. So, hey, one final thought.
Yeah.
Anything that maybe there's a young guy or young gal that's listening and saying, I am a military member. Um, I'd like to learn more about that. Can they do that on the website as well? They can get
Absolutely. And
information.
there's a link there that you can just click on it that says email, and it'll get to our office. And we have that happen. We had a young Marine a couple weeks ago. His command said, yes, if you want to volunteer for this. So he spent 3 days as a volunteer with Soul Survivor Outdoor at Joshua Tree, belaying and climbing and being part of the whole deal, because he said, hey, is this something that I can get involved in? And he was connected to us, and we absolutely want that, because I got a bit of gray hair, and you know what, nothing works better than that young service member. Well, number one,
Hmm.
I think it's a benefit to them,
Sure.
and number two, they get to serve, and number three, when they're a young Christian service member and there's another 21, 2, 3, 4, 5 year old standing next to them, they have a pretty large voice to be able to be heard
Yep.
by this other person to go, hey, why are you a Christian? what
That's
what
right.
what makes you want to follow Christ? And gee, I didn't even know you could be a Christian and
Hmm.
serve in the military. And
Isn't that
so
crazy? Crazy.
yeah, so these folks get to be part of what we're doing,
That's super.
and love to have them come out if we're in an area where they're at, or they want to travel a little bit. Of
Hmm.
course, we're only doing events 2-3 times a month, so
Well, that's a
the
lot though. That's a lot of opportunity. So, hey, if you're listening and you want to know more, go to Soul Survivor Outdoor singular, Soul Survivor Outdoor at .org, and you can
yep.
find that information, and you can send them an email or be a part of that process. And we really encourage you to do that. Man, Rick, it's been a blessing to have you hear your story, hear more about what's going on, and man, our continued prayers for you guys as you engage,
Yeah.
and anything that we can do to add value to that. We're excited about being a part of that as well, if we can, somewhere down the road.
Oh,
So
Kevin, just really appreciate you guys. Appreciate the resources that you have available. Appreciate getting some Bibles from you guys recently that have already been distributed, and so just appreciate the partnership. And
yeah,
and
that's great.
we're
We're in it
all in the
together,
same
man.
team.
Yeah, that's right. We're
Absolutely,
in it together. Yeah,
that's
it's
right.
great. Love it. All right, buddy. Well, hey, thank you so much for listening. And we hope that you'll join us again next time for the Warriors Journey podcast. And Rick, once more, thanks again to you and Soul Survivor Outdoor and all the folks that are volunteering and working. And our prayers is for the future, thinking about all the people that are going to be introduced to a real good thought, a real great end game of, hey, there's purpose and you're valued, and there's more to this life. So can't think of anything better. So, man, blessings on you. And thanks again
Thank
for
you.
listening. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks
Thanks.
so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.